some things we probably should have covered before we even talked about our very first unit when it comes to the exercises and muscles we cover in this class, and that's the basic concepts of weightlifting. So we're going to talk today about the basics of weightlifting, and that is going to be covered in 6 different topics: types of resistance, the phases of the movement, workout structure, concepts of load, best practices, and then we're going to cover some misconceptions. We're just going to cover them because there's literally hundreds of them that we could be talking about. So when we are talking about these things, these are what kind of would apply to anyone at any time, not just when you're here at Sturgis High School, but especially when you were to get out and be working out in some kind of public or private facility. Okay, the first topic is types of resistance. And our first type of resistance is gravity. So ever since Sir Isaac Newton developed his theory of gravity while he was sitting under a tree, he claims, and he was hit in the head with an apple, gravity is the main and probably the most common form of providing what we would call resistance training. Okay, so the muscles work against some kind of resistance. That's why we call it resistance training. And gravity, of course, is probably the most obvious. Even something as simple as body weight exercise, gravity is always pushing down on us from above. That's what these red arrows are meant to be. So as gravity is pushing down, you are naturally going to have to resist that, which is why climbing stairs, climbing a hill, when you pick something up off the floor, standing up, sometimes you might feel a little something in your muscle because obviously you're resisting gravity. And if we were weightless, if we were in outer space, doing an exercise like this woman's doing here would be practically useless. So the common things we see with gravity-based resistance is obviously dumbbells, barbells, the plates themselves, kettlebells, and really the possibilities are endless. Like here is something from the Highland Games. Some of these people are trying to flip a log for distance. It's complicated why that's a game or a sport. But either way, I mean, that is a heavy object that's being pulled down to earth from gravity, and by just simply trying to resist the gravity, you're performing a strength training exercise. Okay, the other common type of resistance that we're going to talk about is called elastic resistance. Okay, so most commonly we see this in something in our weight room we call them jump stretch bands. And these bands are made of thin little layers of latex, and they provide different basically poundages or intensities of resistance. But something like this woman here, she's pushing down against the band, and that's working her triceps. So that's an elastic type of resistance. We also have medical tubing, which is what it was commonly referred to when they were first made. Now they're just made for this exact purpose. And that's a tubular type of rubber hose that does provide resistance as well. We have things like TheraBands, which is commonly used in physical therapy or down in the athletic training room. Again, those are very similar to the jump stretch bands, but they're just very thin layers, and they have different widths, and that's what changes their intensity. And you have bungees as another very common type of elastic resistance. Okay, the next topic is air. So this is probably not one you are very familiar with because these are not as common in fitness facilities, but just like having gravity on a machine carry the plates up and down, or the selectorized stack of weights moving them up and down, you can also use air power. So this is a company called Kaiser, and they have an air compressor in a weight room someplace, and they're connected through air hoses to these machines. And using this control panel, you can go up or you can go down in resistance to provide a constant amount of resistance. The bands would be increasing resistance over time. Static gravity weights kind of decrease resistance over time. And this would be a constant resistance over time because you're moving against air pressure. These are very expensive. That's probably why you've never seen them. But that is an actual type of resistance. The next thing we're going to talk about are the phases of the movement. Any kind of, whether it be gravity, whether it be using it elastic or using even air power, ultimately all movements in a resistance training exercise funnel down to 2 parts. We have what's called the eccentric and we have the concentric. So eccentric is defined very simply as going with gravity. Okay, so on the way down, this gentleman is doing the eccentric portion of the exercise. And when he stands up, he is doing the concentric portion of the exercise. So eccentric means with gravity, and concentric means against gravity. And this is basically all exercises boil down to these two parts. And our muscles respond in different ways depending what direction we're going, whether they're going eccentrically or concentrically. And a lot of people only worry about the concentric or the positive part of the exercise, and that is not the best way to think of it. Over 50% of the muscle damage is done eccentrically. In sports, a lot of injuries happen with gravity or on the eccentric component. Okay, so the question is now, here's a woman using a machine. Okay, which part is the eccentric part? Is it when she's coming down? Is that the eccentric portion? Or is it when she's going up? Okay, I want you to think about that for a second. Where's the eccentric part? Where's her muscles working with gravity and where are her muscles working against gravity? Well, the answer is on the way up is the eccentric part, because on the top of that pulley, there's a pulley, a cable, a pulley, and then there's a stack of weights sliding up and down. So when she lets it go, the weights go down. So that's why she's moving with gravity on the way up. And when she pulls it to her chest, the weights go up, so she's going against gravity. Once you introduce something like a pulley, which many machines are function around, then you are all of a sudden kind of reversing this eccentric and concentric components. Another really common way to think about it is eccentric, since you're going with gravity, are called negatives, okay, are often called negatives. And concentric portions of the movement are also often called the positive. So when you're going, the negative is lowering the weight down and the positive is pushing the weight back up. And if you have a pulley, of course, that would be inverted, or that would be reversed. Okay, the next topic is workout structure. There are many different ways to structure a workout, but there's some common terminologies we just need to make sure that we cover. And that first one is repetitions. So we've probably already talked about this in class, and the fact that I asked you to do 6 repetitions. Well, a repetition is simply how many times you perform the simple movement. And a set is how many chunks of those repetitions you're going to do. So if I say you're going to do 4 sets, I'm going to try to pull out this little pen here. So if I say we're going to do 4 times 6, okay, we're not doing 24 reps. We're doing 6, resting, doing 6, resting, doing 6, resting, doing 6. Okay, that is how we are performing 4 sets of 6. So the sets is how you chunk out the repetitions. And volume is an interesting concept we'll talk a lot about at a later time. We've always talked about this in class. And volume is how much of a movement is done. Okay, so if the volume in that 4 sets of 6 was 24, but you don't do 24 straight repetitions. Okay, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to do them in chunks to allow some rest in between. And rest, which is obscured here by my little image, rest is how long of a break you take between sets. Okay, so here's an example of a very basic workout log or a workout program, and they explain to you here which exercise in order you're going to do, the description of the exercise. So here's shoulder press, 5 sets of, so we got here 5 sets of 6 reps with 90 seconds rest. Okay, so you do 6 to 8 reps 5 times, and you take 90 seconds of rest. And here is a spot for someone to record their weights. So they're going to do, for the set number 1, 45 pounds, and 55 pounds, and 55 pounds, and 55 pounds, and 60. It also can be represented in a different way, where maybe you have a certain percentage. Okay, here's another one. This is just a random graphic I found online, because these are always done in the same way. So here's bench press. They're going to do how many sets? I don't know, 4 sets of 6. And then they record the weight they do. And then each week they see how much weight they do over time. There's also electronic versions of this. And I think right now there's a lot of apps out there that are workout apps, and they guide you through certain types of workout. But this is one we used to use called Team Builder, or something I controlled. It wasn't something we just bought. I controlled the workouts, but they were structured in a certain way. So here is the day 4. It would say you're doing trap bar deadlift, barbell push press. You're doing 4 sets of 7 and then 4 sets of 8. Then when you went to click on, like here for back squat, it would say 3 sets of 5. So here's set number 1, 5 reps. Set number 2, 5 reps. Set number 3, 5 reps. And it told you right there in the middle, it's 120 seconds of rest. So that's 2 minutes of rest. Okay, here's an example of an annual sports plan. And in this annual sports plan, I have described what the volume is going to be. So here we have the percent. So how hard is it going to be? And over time with this volleyball and soccer line here in orange, we were going to undulate, and then eventually, this is the season itself, eventually we're going to end up over time increasing to a rate that we're climbing up and up and up towards this 80-90% range. And also down below, this is the number of repetitions we would do in a given week. Over time, those repetitions increased, okay? And that's a way of measuring volume. Lots of different ways to measure volume. That's not the only way to measure volume, but that is definitely one of the ways in which you can measure volume. Okay. Another important part of workout structure is the order of your exercises. Okay, so we've discussed this already, and maybe you weren't listening or didn't understand what I meant, and that is that we need to do multi-joint exercises first. Okay, because a multi-joint exercise, meaning something like this, like the bench press, when you're doing bench press, you're working at the elbow joint, okay? You're working at the shoulder joint, and your scapula is rotating as well. So we would call something like bench press a 3-joint exercise, okay? And we want to do those first because they take the most amount of energy. If we were to do all the tiny lifts first, we would be essentially exhausted. And then when we go to do the major lift or the major movement, the multi-joint exercise, we wouldn't have any energy left. So it's very common to do the multi-joint exercises first. That's what's ideal, followed by single joint exercises. And when we say single joint exercises, we're talking about exercises where there's only one joint working. So in the above graphic here, the only joint moving right here is his elbow. And in the curls, the only joint moving is his elbow. So we would call that a single joint exercise. And it's very common for you to do cardio or speed and agility work prior to the workout or after the workout. That's probably not something that's set in stone. It depends on what the goal of the trainer or the coach is. But very oftentimes you'll see somebody do cardio maybe to warm up, or you'll see them do that after they do their lifting. You also see speed and agility work coming prior to the workout, or sometimes you see it coming after the workout. That does depend on what's kind of expected of the athlete or the person being trained. Okay, there's different types of sets. So we've already been doing something called a superset, and this graphic here is not what a superset really is. It's just a kind of a online weightlifting comedic personality, and I thought it was funny, so I would put it in there. Anyway, supersets are when you go back and forth between two exercises. So, for example, in our class, we've already done bench press. As soon as we get done with our set of 8 reps of bench press, we get down and we do the tricep extensions on the bench. That's an example of a superset. You can also do something called a drop set. Okay, a drop set is where the amount of weight you do decreases over time. So let's say I might do 100 pounds at bench press, then I'll do 95, and then I'll do 90, and then I'll do 85, and then I'll do 80 or something like that. That's what a drop set is. There's many ways you can structure these types of things. The next type is a pause set. Okay, so where we did this outside, where I would have you squat down, and then about halfway down, you'd pause and hold that position, and then you would come back up. That's an example of a pause set. Another type is called heavy negatives. We talked about the negative being the eccentric portion of a movement. So here's a person starting up on the pull-up bar and then going eccentrically down, okay, to control their movement, only really focusing on the eccentric component of the exercise. For something like pull-ups, if you can't do a pull-up from straight arm to bent arm, this is a really interesting way to develop that strength. And the last one I'll talk about today, there's lots of other ones, but these are the most common ones, is something called AMRAP, or as many reps as possible. We also use them in Team Builder, and their acronym was AMAP, as many as possible. And it's about doing something probably not super heavy until your body fails. So basically until your technique breaks down or until your muscles give out.